Welcome to the place where money, power, and history collide. And remember, nothing is as simple as it seems. Today I will not talk to you about wars, battlefield clashes, or swords. Today I will tell you the secret of how an empire managed to stay standing without going bankrupt. In history, there are some states that, even when they collapsed or were defeated, still managed to remain on their feet. This is exactly the subject we will focus on today. Today we will talk about the reasons why the great Ottoman Empire, despite centuries of warfare, did not go bankrupt like many other states. This is not a military strategy story. It is a magnificent story of accounting. The Ottomans are known in history for great victories, conquest, and the constant expansion of their territory. But this is the visible face of the stage. The real story has always been written backstage, because, as is well known, empires cannot survive by winning wars alone. Soldiers fight, but money is required. Cannons fire, but they need foundries. Fleets set sail, but they need safe harbors. And behind all of this lies a single question: how will the bill for this war be paid? This is where the true secret of the Ottoman Empire begins. Since the world in which the Ottomans were founded was not the world of modern capitalism, they never viewed money primarily as a tool for enrichment, but rather as a tool of balance. Money was not a freely circulating commodity. It was an infrastructure established by the state. Today, we are told that money emerged from barter. Barter was difficult, so people invented money to make trade easier. But this is not true. In reality, there was only one reason for the emergence of money, and that was the same in the Ottoman Empire, in Rome, and in China: to feed the army and collect taxes. For the Ottomans, money was not a toy of the market. Money was like the nervous system of the state. If it was stretched too much, it would become paralyzed. If it was loosened too much, control would be lost. For this reason, the Ottomans always kept money under control. The real strength of the empire was its ability to manage money well. The Ottoman fiscal mindset was completely different from today's free market reflexes. For the Ottomans, money was an indispensable element for the continuity of order, but it was never regarded as sacred. Now let us widen the stage a little. What was the world facing the Ottoman Empire? Europe. And in Europe, a very different process was unfolding. Capitalism was being born not from freedom, but from monopoly. Rapidly growing debt, the seizure of trade routes, and the exploitation of resources were indispensable to companies that acted like states. Even though capital accumulation accelerated, debt grew at the same pace. European states began to finance their war budgets by constantly expanding them with more debt. Today's bonds, interest, and budget deficits were born right there. War became an accounting item. The Ottomans, however, always kept their distance from this approach, because for the Ottomans, debt was not seen as a strength, but as a weakness. Debt meant mortgaging the future. For the Ottomans, war was an activity that had to generate profit. What made war meaningful was that the lands acquired through conquest could cover their own costs. The Ottomans' intelligent move was this: no sword was drawn before the accounting of war was done. War was first won with the pen, then with the sword. Otherwise, war was meaningless. By establishing the Taimar system, the Ottomans offered land revenues instead of paying salaries to soldiers. In this way, the army remained standing without cash, leaving the state treasury. Taxes were collected. Balance was maintained. This system was far more resilient than the modern salaried army system. By spreading the war economy to the provinces, the Timur system prevented inflationary pressure, salary increase demands, and the formation of debt. It allowed the center to breathe. Here we hear the first great rhyme of history. Ancient Rome collapsed at exactly this point. As Rome expanded, the cost of the army increased. What was the solution? The silver content of the coin was reduced. The same coin, but with less value. The result? Inflation, loss of trust, collapse. The Ottomans managed to remain standing for centuries by not making this mistake. Because money was an article of faith, and when that faith was broken, the state would collapse. Ottoman administrators were aware of this reality. Now let us turn our gaze to the east. One of the first civilizations to use paper money was ancient China. At first, everything was perfect. Paper money accelerated trade and relieved the state. But what happened when too much money was printed? Inflation rose, trust disappeared, state authority was shaken. The Ottomans, being aware of this, printed money in moderation, preserved its value, and considered this more important than war. Because for the Ottomans, the real war was first won in the ledger, and only then on the battlefield. Another secret of the Ottomans was the way they distributed the cost of war across society. The Avarez taxes, collected during wartime and abolished during peace, existed for extraordinary circumstances. This tax was not permanent, and it secured the trust of the people. People knew that war was a temporary burden. In modern states today, however, the state of war is permanent. Taxes rise but never fall. Debt is taken but never closed. This difference determines the lifespan of empires. Here, history once again rhymes. The reason modern states become slaves to debt is that they finance their wars through borrowing. Debt gives birth to interest, and interest drains the budget. For the Ottomans, however, the philosophy that money was not an end but a means allowed them to enter wars for centuries without borrowing. The reason was that the financing of war was embedded within the system itself. At this point, let us look at the foundation system. During wartime, the state redirected its resources to the front: health, education, infrastructure, the protection of the poor. All of these were taken outside the state budget. Foundations functioned as social insurance. Social peace was not disrupted. This made the war economy sustainable. The guild system was also part of the same logic. Cheapness and expensiveness were regulated. Excessive profit was forbidden. Prices were always kept under control, because the Ottomans knew that if the market went out of control, the state would collapse. Not freedom, but balance was essential. This was completely opposed to the modern capitalist mindset. But no system lasts forever. The Ottoman balance was eventually disrupted. When did it happen? When the empire reached for external debt, became entangled in interest-based financing, and began to imitate Europe's debt-financed war model. At that point, history rhymed once again. Money, being an article of faith, was damaged, and the Ottomans fell into the same mistake as Rome and China. What we experience in the modern world today are echoes of the last century of the Ottoman Empire. When war became a matter of the sword rather than accounting, states began to finance wars with credit. Central banks printed money, inflation rose. The people became poorer, but war continued. Instead of bullets, numbers began to speak. Now let us ask ourselves this question. Why did the Ottoman Empire remain standing for 600 years? Because it saw war not as a matter of heroism, but as a matter of accounting. Because it did not sanctify money, but treated it as a tool. Because it defined debt not as power, but as weakness. Because it valued balance more than growth. For centuries, the Ottomans preserved the faith in money and embraced the idea of money as a belief system. When money deteriorated, the state deteriorated as well. History does not repeat itself, but it rhymes. The budget crises, debt spirals, and permanent states of war we experience today are the modern verses of that rhyme. And now we come to the closing. Think about this. Why do states today survive only through constant borrowing? Why are wars sustained at the cost of bankruptcy? Why do budgets work more for interest payments than for the people? This is exactly what the great secret of the Ottoman Empire tells us through its 6 centuries of survival. Because sometimes the greatest power is not winning, but not going bankrupt. You are at the place where money, power, and history collide. And now you know. Nothing is as simple as it seems. The curtain closes, but the play is not over, because this theater is still being played. If you enjoyed the narration, I invite you to subscribe.